I'm Bree Luck, and you are listening to the Pause to Go podcast, where we explore the process of turning life's transitions into stellar transformations. You can expect interviews with experts, straight talk with remarkable humans, and conversations about making the most of every phase of life. Because when we approach life's stickiest spots with curiosity, support, and a little bit of inspiration, anything is possible. So whether you're on your way to work or settling in with your favorite beverage, together we can pause to go. As a solopreneur, I really like the flexibility to work from pretty much anywhere, so I'm happy to head down to Code-Based Co-working, where I can enjoy the company of others while I tackle my to-do list. Also, they have a state-of-the-art, consumer-friendly podcasting studio that is frankly my home away from home. So head over to Code-Based Co-working, check it out, and when you do, tell them that Bree sent you. Before we talk about science, I want to talk to you about my grandmother's cooking, which is an art. My grandmother, y'all can just call her Mimi. Mimi is a phenomenal classic 1950s cook. Her Crabmeat Louisianne is absolutely one of my favorite comfort foods of all time. I mean, it really comes down to that and Little Debbie's Swiss rolls for me. And some of you may be surprised by this fact, but my closest friends know that the way to my heart is through Crabmeat Louisianne and Little Debbie Swiss rolls. Anyway, that's phenomenal. She makes a chicken tetrazzini, which is like no other chicken tetrazzini I've ever had. Her pimento cheese has rendered all other attempts futile. Don't even look at a grocery store brand. And I know that I'm biased, but her cream puffs and cheesecake are, as my friend Beatrix says, beyond. Maybe you have a Mimi too. So maybe this is familiar to you. My Mimi is 98 years old, and thank God she is still making these delights for her sprawling family. I'm grateful for that for so many reasons, but one of them, I'll be really honest, is because even though she has attempted to pass along all of her recipes to those of us who like to spend a little time in the kitchen, none of her recipes actually measure up to what she does. Sometimes it's because she simply leaves out a crucial step. Like the time I was making a birthday pie for Jeff, and I used her key lime pie recipe, and she told me to put 4 eggs in the custard, and what she really meant was 4 egg yolks, but she left out the yolk parts, so poor Jeff had a very, very, very runny birthday pie. But mostly it's because Mimi cooks by the feel, not by the teaspoon. So I have spent the better part of many phone calls and visits with her over the last years trying to get accurate measurements on all of her top hits so that we mere mortals can recreate her dishes with accuracy. The reason for measurements in recipes, and I believe with time, is not only to understand what's going on, but to communicate with others, to be able to share in knowledge, in connection, and to be able to replicate tasks, to make things sustainable so that it benefits us all. So it makes sense that we do measure time. But my question today is, why do we measure time the way we measure time? Specifically, why are there 24 hours in a day? And why do we then divide that up into basically 12 hours of daytime and 12 hours of nighttime? And because so many other ways of measuring show up in multiples of 10, why do we have this time thing that is on multiples of 12? And what is the significance of the number 12 with time? Let's just take a step back really quickly. And I'm going to say what you already know, which is that one full day, one full cycle of a day, we measure as 24 hours. Somebody invented that there were 24 hours in a day. And then we take that 24 hours and we divide it basically into a day that lasts for 12 hours and a night that lasts for 12 hours. Then we have an hour, and that contains 60 minutes. And then each of those 60 minutes contains 60 seconds. But then each second is divided into 1,000 milliseconds. Now, that's where it gets screwy, right? Because 60 is a multiple of 12. That sort of makes sense. But then those milliseconds, they go back to a base of 10. Why? These are the things that drive me crazy. This is what keeps me awake in the middle of the night. I probably need better things to worry about. So here's a little history lesson. What we think, and by we, I mean the people who post about the origins of time on the internet, my new best friends. By the way, I've put references in the show notes so you can read up on it too. Anyway, there's evidence that the ancient Sumerians may have been the first people to divide the day into smaller parts. And they use a duodecimal system. That means it uses a base of 12. And then a sexagesimal system. Just try saying that 3 times, by the way. I mean, sexagesimal has a base of 60, which is 5 times 12, for those of you like me who don't make math in your head. So why a base of 12 and a base of 60? Here's what's interesting. What I want you to do now is to hold out your hand in front of you. Just hold it out so that you're looking at your palm. So I'm holding out my left hand. I know this is an audio podcast and you can't see me. So just know that I'm looking at the palm of my left hand and I'm looking at the fingers of my left hand. And starting at the tip of my pointer finger, I can count the sections of my fingers. And this is only the fingers, not the thumb. In fact, you can use your thumb as the sort of pointing device to touch each section of your fingers, and you can count with me down the pointer finger 1, 2, 3, middle finger 4, 5, 6, ring finger 7, 8, 9, and pinky 10, 11, 12. The magic number. When you hear 12, do any of you have flashbacks to Sesame Street? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I loved Sesame Street. So anyway, turns out it was just how people counted on their fingers back then. These folks knew how to get more mileage out of their fingers, so they counted 12 on each hand, which gave them 24 to work with. Mystery number 1 solved. Now, the 24-hour day. The 24-hour day concept comes from the ancient Egyptians. So they actually divided the day into 10 hours, but then they used shadow clocks, or we might call them sundials. I think they're the same thing. And they would add 1 hour at each end of that 10-hour period. Those are the twilight periods, one just at sunrise and one at sunset. And later, they would divide that whole time between sunrise and sunset into 12 equal parts. It makes sense that this 12-hour day division happened in a location that was relatively close to the equator compared to, say, the Arctic Circle, where it really would have made a difference if you were talking about winter with very, very, very short daylight periods and summer when the daylight hours are pretty much 24 hours long. The thing is that the absence of sunlight made it really difficult to tell time at night. Like when you have a sundial, you can tell time during the day, but at night it's really hard to do that. So the way they did that was based on, as you might guess, the observation of the stars. Back then they didn't have sophisticated technology, but they could identify 36 small constellations, which they called decans, and those would rise on the horizon as the Earth rotated. So from dusk until dawn, 18 decans were actually visible in the sky. However, each twilight period had 3 of the decans assigned. So that left 12 for the period of complete darkness or nighttime. So the rise of each of the 12 decans marked an hour. And that's how we ended up with the 12 hours every night. The thing is, though, that the 12 decans didn't necessarily indicate a fixed length of time. And it wasn't until the 14th century in Europe, when mechanical clocks came into use, that commoners began to use the system that we practice to this day. So great. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and talk about the year, because each decan rose before sunrise and then marked the beginning of a 10-day period. So a total of 36 decans times 10 equaled 360 days a year. So we'll come back to that in a minute. That's why we had the 12 hours night and the 12 hours day and the 24-hour cycle and the 360 days, except that the year we know now has 365 days. So we have to return to the Egyptians to figure this one out. The ancient Egyptians also created the calendar based on the moon, and like many people throughout the world, they regulated their lunar calendar by the seasonal appearance of the star Sirius. What we now know is that that timing aligned pretty closely to the true solar year, only it was about 12 minutes shorter. But the lunar and the solar years didn't quite match up. So to solve this problem, the Egyptians divided a year into 12 months of 30 days each. And to complete the year, 5 extra days were added so that the 12 months were equal to 360 days plus 5 extra days. Clear as mud, right? Now we have the year measured out and the 24-hour day, but what about the hour? So the Greek astronomers, who helped us make life simpler by equally dividing 24 hours, followed the Babylonians' base 60 system for astrological calculations. So for convenience, they divide an hour into 60 minutes and then each minute into 60 seconds. We don't really know why the Babylonians used the base 60 system, but it is a multiple of 12, right? And it's also the smallest number divisible by the first 6 counting numbers, and maybe that meant something to the Babylonians. I don't know. Math. It always comes back to math. Now, what about those milliseconds? Well, the truth is, nobody really cared about milliseconds. They were not important until 1901. And by then, scientists and mathematicians had developed instruments to measure smaller units of time, and they were pretty much married to a base 10 system in general. So they decided to stick with a base 10 system for getting really into the granular on the time front. So why is this all important? Why have I just taken you on this whole history lesson of time? Here's why. We put so much stock into measuring time that we can all relate to. It makes sense. That's how we connect with each other. It's how we can show up at the same place at the same time when we're traveling all over the world. It's the advantage of having time be a measurable construct is that we can connect. But the disadvantage is that on a human level, on an earthly level, on a natural level, it doesn't take into consideration the ebb and flow of time. Like so many forms of technological advances, when we start to measure time, we gain and we lose. We can schedule a Zoom call with someone at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but maybe we lose the natural evolution of a day. Because maybe 4 o'clock is actually a better time for us to sit with our children and make dinner. So this week, what if we take a little bit of our brain space to appreciate both measured time and unmeasured time? To not take time as a construct for granted, but also to recognize that it doesn't have to rule us. And I'm going to ask you specifically, what are ways that you can reconnect with the natural world in your day? Because we know the convenience of measuring time. But what happens if we allow ourselves the space and the wherewithal to reconnect with the natural ebb and flow of time? What does that give us? I can also tell you this. After years of making Mimi's recipes, I know a lot of measurements. And I can make cheese biscuits that are pretty close to being on par with hers. Pretty close, but not quite. Because quality goes far beyond the measurements. Hey, if you got something out of this episode, let me know. Shoot me an email, share it with a friend, post it on social media, or leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to leave reviews. Anyway, let me know, and I'll send you Mimi's incredible Crabmeat Louisianne recipe with most of the right measurements. Stay curious, y'all. Thank you so much for listening to the Pause to Go podcast. If you got something out of this episode, let us know. Share it with a friend, join our Facebook group, and subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts if you loved it. If not, no worries. We want you to tell it like it is, and we'd love to have your input. If you want to know more about what I'm up to, you can follow me on Instagram at TheLovelyUnbecoming or at my website, thelovelyunbecoming.com. Stay curious, y'all.